Good afternoon, Madonna here from New Leaf Health Team. I wanted to chat to you this afternoon about grief. It's been something that a few people have asked me about, so I figured let's discuss grief. Grief and loss go hand in hand so much. Most people think of grief as the loss of a loved one, but it can be so much more. If someone has a car accident, it can be, and you're injured for life, it can be the loss of that life that you're grieving. If you're in a marriage or a relationship and it falls apart, it can be the grief not only of the loss of that relationship, but the loss of your potential for that relationship for the rest of your life. So grief is so much more complicated and multifactorial when you start to think about it. So grief and loss, when we find out 1 in 6 couples in Australia, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 couples in Australia are infertile. Imagine that grief of the lost family that you believe to be your birthright. If you've worked really hard towards a specific job or industry or something and it falls apart around you, there can be the grief of the loss of that. How quickly we move on is totally an individual thing. There is no timeline for grief, but there are several stages to it. When I studied counselling kinesiology with Gordon Dixon in Australia, 20 years ago, I would guess, Gordon was amazing. So he utilised a lot of the information out there and put together the grief gauge, which is very well known in counselling and psychology areas. And this is something that I use every day with my clients. So as I am scanning, doing my kinesiology, these are the areas that I'm looking at. So if we're working on, say, the loss of a marriage, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a child, the loss of a life that we were planning, then the kinesiology can target where we are stuck on that grief gauge. So the first stage is alarm. So that's, the shock, the denial, the anger or collapse. And then there's a multitude of different emotions and impacts beneath those. And then we start to adapt to grief. And some people adapt with blame. We blame everything, or we take it on and we become guilty, or we have that fear of loss for the rest of our life. So the grief, instead of being a one-off incident, it becomes oh my God, let's hope it doesn't happen to me again. We go into all sorts of stages of exhaustion, when we're not getting over it very well. So things like chronic fatigue and chronic inability to move forward, that depression that can hit and just take over our heart and our lives and our souls, so that we just can't move forward as well as we would like to. That despair and depression can really take hold. And then we start to either adapt or maladapt. Now, if we've adapted well, we've sort of got on with our life, we've accepted it, we've separated from whatever it was that we've lost, and we get a healthy reattachment for someone new, something new, another hobby, another life experience, or we maladapt. And the maladaption is obviously when people who are counsellors and kinesiologists, that's when we tend to see people when they have put up their boundaries and can't move on, and believe they're not lovable or loved, or believe they're not able to move on from their grief or loss. So I'm sure you recognise what I'm saying from all of this is that grief and loss can really put us into a state of survival. So once we are in that state of survival and our brain believes that life is never going to be easy again, it can then affect just about every system in your body. If we get stuck in the anger and the rage, then it can affect our heart, it can affect our energy, it can affect our moods. If we get stuck in the depression, and we can't get out of bed and we can't move on, there's no excitement about life. So grief and loss can have a major impact on the way that our body works. It can shut down the gut. It can slow down your thyroid process. It can activate the adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol all day, every day, so that we're constantly feeling anxious and stressed, and then we run out of energy and we fall asleep and we just get exhausted, so we can be in this real running on the adrenaline with the anger and rage and frustration. Then we dip because we've used up all our energy with those hormones. So they have done studies. The ACEs study is, you can imagine people in this study, it's to do with adverse childhood event study. And they looked at people with abuse in their childhood, not feeling safe in their own home, being abused, not having enough money to survive financially, not having that safety with, food and accommodation and happiness within a home environment. And they have found that impacts on our increased risk of cancer, our increased risk of heart disease, our increased risk of diabetes, and everything else as well, dementia, and Alzheimer's. So, and it's almost like the brain is trying to protect us when we're going into those. This is just one thing that has been looked at. Is the brain actually trying to protect us by shutting down those memory centers? The hippocampus, which is one of the major memory centers in the brain, it actually shrinks under long-term stress. They've done some studies on people with dementia, and they found that the hippocampus can be as small as only 9% of the size that it should be. So what should happen under stress? So imagine you're about to get eaten by a tiger, is the hippocampus shrinks so that we just act and react. So it's all about survival. And then once the threat is gone, our brain should rehydrate again and things should start moving. The problem when we get stuck in grief is that things just don't go back to normal as easily, and especially if we've activated survival patterns in the background, how do we move on from that? And there's no great answer to that, but it really is sort of adding meditation into your day, adding Reiki into your world, finding a good kinesiologist and working with them, using a great counselor, using breathing techniques, getting yoga or Pilates or something that gets your body, mind, spirit connection happening, walking on the beach, climbing mountains, getting outdoor. They know that being outdoors increases serotonin and dopamine. Green spaces are so important for our health. So the short answer is that grief can actually affect just about every organ and every cell in our body. There have even been studies done on the immune system where they have looked at what the immune system does with chronic stress. And it's almost like if we're depressed, the immune system seems to follow suit. So if we're depressed and our brain's going, I wish I wasn't here, I wish I could move on with my life, then your immune system is doing you no favors, because your immune system's going, if you don't want to be here, we'll help you out. So the immune system is actually lowered in people with chronic immunity, which once again allows infections and cancer and chronic illness to take hold. So grief can really affect everywhere in the body, not to mention the way that it works with the brain, messing with our ability to problem solve, our ability to remember things, our ability to find solutions. Those areas of the brain can be switched down. It's like we've turned them down on the computer dial because the body wants you to remain vigilant to protect you from more grief in the future. So that's part one. Don't forget to subscribe if you're loving these videos, and I'm going to do a quick little grief meditation just with a combination of emotional stress release points and anti-clockwise over the heart. What that is basically switching points in kinesiology, so it helps to connect the left-right sides of the brain, your logical creative, as well as bringing blood to the frontal cortex where we problem solve, and it helps to open up the pathways to the front, the back and the rear of the brain and the base of the brain to the survival patterns. Okay, take care, talk soon, bye.